Welcome back, everybody. This is the Pinedo Brothers podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and we got right here with me.
I'm JP.
And we're glad that you are here with us. So we're the Pinedo Brothers, filmmakers, artists, and Catholics. And what we always strive to do is to bring our Catholic faith into our art and to revitalize the world of Catholic art through our faith in our film and our art. And today we're talking all about that. Today we're talking about how we portray God in our art, and now also how God is seen and portrayed in other forms, other people's art. So I think something I've noticed, JP, is that people in our society today, they don't take God seriously. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, they don't take God or people that believe in God seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suppose people that believe in God, oftentimes, by extension of the fact that he's the one we're least worried about offending a lot of the times,
Mm-hmm.
we don't take him very seriously ourselves. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. We are afraid of offending like everyone and for every single possible reason. Hyper aware of offending people in today's world, which is not all bad things, because in some ways we definitely don't want to be offensive, but the person we should be most afraid of offending is the one that we're least afraid of offending, and that's God.
Yeah, that whole creator of the universe guy.
Yeah, that one who could like wipe you off the face of the earth. And
we're probably the furthest culture that's ever existed that was least worried about thunderbolts from heaven.
Yeah. It's something that is just kind of joked about today, and I think that we kind of shrug him off, and that's not a good thing. Obviously, I think that today is what we're lacking is intellectual honesty, is what I would say. We should. I think that it's important for people to have that intellectual honesty where they can look at themselves and say, all right, do I believe in God? If I do, then I need to take him seriously and work through this whole process. And if I don't, then that's a whole different matter. But I think what we have today is people who at least think that they do, but they act like he doesn't exist. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. It does make sense. It's unfortunate, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. And so that transfers right into art and film and storytelling. And how can we, as Catholic artists, people who believe and take God seriously, how do we portray God in our work, and how does that penetrate through what we do? Because when it comes down to it, God is very real, and he is very serious. It's not, he's a loving God, but it's a very serious matter.
As C.S. Lewis would put it, he isn't a tame lion.
Exactly. So on that topic, I think I came across a passage from Nietzsche, of all people, recently, that I was very struck by, because I think it really speaks to that, the importance of having intellectual honesty with yourself and taking what you believe to its logical conclusion, to not really be half believing on something, but to really examine what you believe and be honest with yourself. So without further ado, I think I'll go ahead and read that passage, if that's all right.
I love it.
Okay, so this is Friedrich Nietzsche, The Parable of the Madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I seek God, I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, immigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea, Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunged continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as though through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood from us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern onto the ground and broke it into pieces and went. I have come too early, he said. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wondering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars. And yet they have done it themselves. It has been related further that on that same day the madman forced his way into several churches and there struck up his Requiem aeternam Deo. Let out and called to account, he is said always to have replied nothing but, what after all these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?
It's chilling to read that, especially when we were just talking about the cathedrals. Was it last time we had this?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that's chilling to me is that maybe one of the reasons why the cathedrals, we can no longer build cathedrals, is because God is dead. God is dead in the hearts of man. If things are no longer important, if God is no longer God, if he's dead for intents and purposes, we understand we're not in control. Most people, especially after COVID, get that. But if God is dead, then of course it doesn't matter to spend a century building a cathedral. That's a worthy house for the Almighty. So that's you're answering there a bit of a question that I raised, because if God is dead and man killed him, of course you want to make you make a little auditorium to gather to worship him in his sepulcher. If that makes any sense.
It's true. I think very much that that's the case. That how Nietzsche says here, are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward in all directions, when you don't have, as he describes, the sun holding you in place, holding order for everyone and everything. There is wandering. There is no direction. There's no up. There's no down. And I think that's what I'm really getting at right here, is that today we have even Christians who don't truly live as if God is alive, and don't truly live as if he is dead either. They are kind of in that in-between where they are just are dishonest with themselves, and obviously there's a difference between just sinning, falling at times, but also living your outlook in life just completely devoid of that sun, as Nietzsche refers to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what a big misunderstanding of Nietzsche, and I'm not a Nietzsche scholar, obviously, but from this you can take that Nietzsche is not happy about this fact that God is dead. Like he doesn't think that this is a good thing. This is a not good happenstance that God has died. And I think he's putting himself a little bit into the person of a madman, to almost in a prophetic way, because he died a madman. Nietzsche did. Mm-hmm. So it's a very somber thing to read, knowing what's going to happen, and seeing what has happened since that was written.
Mm-hmm. And a lot has happened, like we talked about last time, on the world wars, the genocides and things like that. And I think that it's all very telling. When you disconnect yourself from the sun, there's nothing holding, there's no center. Which reminds me of, it's a poem from after World War I. I forget who the author was, but a British author, where he literally, that's the main through line of the poem. There is no sun, the center cannot hold. Do you happen to recall who I'm talking about there?
It sounds faintly familiar, but it's lost.
Yeah.
My brain is like a boneyard.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, that gets to the point where let's talk about that. Let's as Catholics, I think that we're called to really make God the center of our storytelling, and that it is not just done through the your stereotypical Christian film kind of way, but in a way.
Yeah, that would be God Is Not Dead 5 or something like that. And all due respect to God Is Not Dead 5, I've met with those producers and they're wonderful people. But that's not what, if that's all we would be making, that would be a very old story. Mm-hmm. And so that's not what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it transfers to all forms of art and all stories. All stories should be stories of faith, and in some way a act of praise towards God. Because if we hold ourselves to be Christians and to actually take this seriously, then everything we do is something that should be designed towards praising God. Do you agree? Yeah,
I do agree. I think that's an easy thing to say, but it's a very difficult thing to apply. When I think of just composing art for the sake of praising God, I think of Song of Songs, the Old Testament canticles that Solomon wrote, which is of course a lovely piece of art that's praising God. But what does that mean in practice when you're saying it? When you're not saying that we all are writing Song of Songs. Mm-hmm. What are you saying exactly?
Well, I'm not going to say that I have any kind of perfect example of it. I will say, though, that the book that I wrote, The Unfollowed, was kind of an attempt to be a kind of a broken song of praise. At the end of the story, the main character, Raphael, is he kind of at the climax of the story, he says a little prayer, and his character is a very simple, very down-to-earth kind of person, and he is just a very simple prayer, like, God, I don't understand you, and I have tried my best, but I am helpless now, and I know that without you. Please help me, basically. And so for me, that was like kind of bringing the character's story, which is, we're talking about a zombie apocalypse story, but even that has a value that is at least I tried to make it have a value that is eternal, and it was bigger than just a little zombie story. So it's kind of a acknowledgement of God in all that you do and write, if that makes sense, and a grounding in that truth. Does that make any sense to you? Am I sounding crazy?
No, you're not sounding crazy, and yes, it does make sense. I think praise in... Why was, in the Old Testament story of Job, why was Job righteous? He was righteous because he wasn't constantly praising God, but he recognized the Creator. He never cursed him. Maybe he could have done better. I'm not saying that Job is a perfect example, but that is an example of someone who is held up for us as a righteous man who persevered in the darkest moments. And so when we're telling stories, we do justice to the stories by allowing the darkness to be real, because darkness is real. Mm-hmm. But if we have the center, that which we revolve around in our lives, and allow the characters that we write about or make movies about to have that same center, or at least the rules of the universe that we're setting up have that center, then the gravity, the ability for our world to still revolve around God, despite the fact that we're not constantly praising him, can come through. Even if we're writing something like Tolkien was writing in the Silmarillion, which was a mythology. He was writing a mythology for this country of England that didn't have one. And so he wrote about gods, and he wrote about the creation story. And he made it different, obviously, than Genesis. And yet there is the idea of praise within it. There is the idea of death and sin and disaster and defeat. But there's still that idea that we're continuing on within, as Lewis calls it, the great dance. And we're a part of that, and that there is that center there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think before we go on too much further, I wanted to bring up a scene from a movie that is super random, but a very striking, very beautiful scene that I think really, at least really spoke to me. And we'll just go ahead and watch it if that's all right, and then we'll discuss why.
I love it.
All right. So let me know if we're good to go.
Good to go.
Okay. So, pretty crazy scene. I'm assuming, I think you probably know more about this film than I do. Do you want to say a little bit about?
So that's interesting that you wanted to play this this movie or this scene from this movie. This movie is one of Terrence Malick's, one of his best, I would say, from a very talented director who's had many great films. He is a director that often shoots in Austin. So I've worked with a lot of the people, given that I went to school at University of Texas at Austin. I didn't work with Malick, but I worked with a lot of people who often work with Malick, and they speak of him with the highest of praise, which says a lot when the people you work with speak of you highly. That means a lot. So I think very favorably of his work, and his work is often seeded with Catholic themes within him. I saw this movie when I was living in Los Angeles. I was just about to graduate from film school, and I remember I went to the theater drunk.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, back in the day, I could drink a lot more than I can now. Being 21 is, or maybe I was 22, is there's a lot that you can do that you can't do when you're 32, and I'm sure there's more than I can do now than I will be able to when I'm 42. Such is life.
Lacrimosa.
So I went to the theater, and I remember this scene so vividly. I remember that scene, the creation sequence. It's an odd movie, but Malick's movies are always odd. Mm-hmm. His movies are always odd. I was in a bad mood in that time. I would sometimes drink a lot too much when I was in a bad mood. And thankfully, I don't do that anymore. But, being young and, I think everyone goes through rejection, and everyone is young at one point in time. I think I had drank about maybe a bottle of rum, a full bottle of rum.
That's a headache.
I could do that back then. No, and I didn't get headaches. I didn't get hangovers. And I remember, even though I was so drunk, this scene was so beautiful. Even though I was upset and angry and depressed and, feeling despairing at the time, and I was going with a group of friends that were not a good influence on that would push me further into that despairing. Not through malice, they were not but through just that whole mentality. The point I would make is that scene, they're asking questions, the characters are asking questions. Why have you done this? Why have you created us? You didn't have to. There was no need to create us. And it's completely out of left field that they have this creation sequence, because the story is about a young man, well, maybe a middle-aged man, who's trying to come to terms with his very strict, abusive father, the abusive father figure. And then his coming to terms with the love that his mother showed him, and then trying to come these two forces within his childhood that shaped him, and how he feels that they both have value, but at the same time he's trying to not be upset, trying to not be resentful to his father, and yet he is resentful and he's recognizing it, and then he's experiencing this tragic loss, this character. And so in the middle of all of these forces going on, these elemental forces, they throw in this creation sequence where the main character is asking, how did you create? Why did you create? What is man that you've thought of him? And, I'm sitting in that theater drunk, and I remember thinking, this is beauty, this is good, this is true. Not because he's making a point, not because he's out to create Catholic art or Catholic film, because it is good, it is beautiful, it is well done, and it affected me for the better, I would say. Not like I figured everything out after that movie, but it's a very beautiful scene, and it's still and I recognize that, and beauty has that ability to recognize that which ought to be our center, moves us to something that is beyond what we are. But in any case, that's that movie.
And I think you really hit the nail on the head right there, that it's the idea of when we say that we want to center our art on God and to praise God with what we do, we're not, at least me, I'm not saying that we need to be making a praise and worship music video, you know? What I'm saying is that our work should be like this, that it's portraying what is good and what is true, because that connects with people in ways that they don't expect, and they don't, and oftentimes don't even realize. It's watching a scene like that is an encounter with beauty that you weren't expecting, and it takes you by surprise. But it reminds you of what is at the center. You know, it brings you back to what is true. And we've talked about this before. We all have that sense of that longing for beauty, that longing for what is true. And ultimately, as Catholics, I think we believe that is a longing for God. And so things, even if it's a movie scene like this, connect us with God, because it connects us with what is good and true and beautiful. And this is quite beautiful. And one of the reasons I like it too is that it's a portrayal of creation that it doesn't have like big cartoon hands of God, like, all right, putting things together. It's a very, naturalistic kind of portrayal of creation, but it's still very obvious that you can kind of see God's hand in it. That scene where like the mist is kind of coming across the screen, where it's like moving towards it. It's kind of, to me, it reminded me of like God's hand coming in and in building the universe, but in a way that a person who, if you believe in evolution, this is a scene that's perfectly compatible with that. And if you believe in creation, it's perfectly compatible, because it's just God's working a miracle in a way that is beautiful and pretty awesome to watch. Did you have anything come on?
No, I was just gonna say amen to that.
Yeah. So let's watch a little bit more then. We'll skip ahead a little bit and see a little bit of something, and then we'll kind of draw some lines, and I think we'll close out pretty soon. Yeah, we good? Okay. Okay. Honestly, that is, I mean, it's just kind of, a scene just blows my mind. I'm a huge fan of it. I mean, it's almost completely unrelated to the rest of the movie, but I am just very much struck by how similar, it's almost like a mirror of the first scene that we watched, how it's the grand scale, the creation of the universe and the planets and the cosmic figures, and then it zooms way in to see the beginning of life on Earth, and in stages as well. This really looks like it looks like evolution, but also I think a creationist could say it also looks like 7 days, the 6 days. On this day this happened, on this day this happened. So just very impressive. And to come to bring it back to what our topic is, this I think is how we can portray God in our art. Like we said, bringing in what is beautiful, but also notice that it did portray some darkness as well. The fact that the song Lacrimosa was being sung at the beginning is reminiscent that it just calls to mind that this beginning will also have an end, that this universe will end as well, because Lacrimosa is a requiem song, if I'm not mistaken. And as things are being brought to life, they are also, it's calling to mind that they are mortal and they will end. So it's a balance of the two. And I think this is just a great example of what we can strive for as Catholic artists, is that we're not put in a box of, all right, we're Catholic artists, so we have to do this one certain formula for everything that we do. No, we should be branching out into all these different types of art and this different modes of storytelling. We are called to be innovators, to do things that are new, and to which way that we feel that we want to explore the beauty of God, we are called to follow that. Obviously, we have to be rooted in what is true and good and beautiful. But it's just, I think, a beauty of Catholic faith is that you're not put in a box.
Yeah, definitely not put in a box. And the more that you try to put the Catholic faith in the box, the more that it dies. It's very difficult to do that well. I think Augustine would talk about that in City of God. But in any case, yes, I think as Catholic artists, you summed up aptly. But I think just as living in this day and age as people of God, I think we can no longer sit back and say, well, we can no longer coast. We can no longer say, okay, this is, a part of who I am as Catholics, but it doesn't have to be a part of an inconvenience. It's a convenient part of me. I think the more that this world and this country shifts, the more difficult it's going to be to just say I believe in God and then live with the permeations of that statement. And that is a call to sometimes to be despairing a little bit, but I think little moments like this where you see beauty, where you lose yourself in a story, or you lose yourself in a song, you lose yourself in just a beautiful time of the day. those are all little callings that God is reaching out to say, hey, I'm here. You know? And if we can create little moments where God can say, hey, I'm here, even if you're drunk in a movie theater, that's something worth trying to do. I'm not saying that it's the most noble thing that anyone could ever do. I don't believe that at all. Filmmakers are not noble by and large. But if there's ever anything that you and I could create that someone could watch and say, oh, hey, God is here, well, that would be nice, don't you think?
Yeah. And so I think that we're about out of time, but I think that really sums it up. That's, if you take away one thing from today, it's that God is real. God is very real, and this is not something. He is not someone to be laughed or shrugged off, and that is a good thing, because he should be at the center, and the center of society and the center of our lives. And if he is, I think that allows you the freedom to explore some wonderful ideas and really portray a lot of beautiful things. So I think it's a wonderful thing. Yeah. You have any closing thoughts, or should we cheers everyone out? Cheers. All right. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And we are very happy to have you around, and we hope you'll be joining us next time. This has been the Pineda Brothers Podcast.
That was Pete.